Thank you. So for those watching the recording, hi, welcome, and thank you for joining us for the Autism Understanding Scotland Autistic Acceptance webinar. Anytime I go to any training, I always want to know, who are these people and why should I be listening to them? So my name is Marion McLaughlin and I'm the CEO at Autism Understanding Scotland. I'm a late diagnosed autistic woman. I got my autism diagnosis 4 years ago past Sunday, so I'm still celebrating this week. I'm a former primary school teacher. I'm a mother of an autistic child, and I'm one of the spokespersons for the Scottish Government's Different Minds campaign, as is Felicity. Right, and who else are you?
So I am also the senior autism practitioner here at Autism Understanding Scotland. I, like Marion, am also a late diagnosed autistic person myself. I'm a former English tutor. I've got 2 autistic children myself, so I'm also a mother of autistic children, and I'm one of the co-chairs currently on the Aberdeenshire Autism Strategy Planning Group as well. So yes, that's us.
That's who we are. So what are we doing today? So we're going to have a little look at what autistic acceptance is, a little bit of a chat about who it's for and why it's important. We're going to have a think about how we can promote acceptance, and then after that we should have some time for some questions and some discussion as well, which we're really looking forward to this evening. So yeah, we put together what acceptance can look like. So whenever we're talking about autistic acceptance, what do we mean, Flick?
So there are, there's a few things here that it can kind of look like, and this is not an exhaustive list by any means. These are just some of the things that we came up with when we were having a little think. But yeah, first and foremost, learning more about autism. That is a really big part of autistic acceptance, because there's a lot of ignorance and stigma still out there. So tackling that by actually getting that really good quality information is really, really key. And then working to support your differences as well. So as autistic people, we do have lots of differences, but rather than kind of fighting against them, if we actually work to support them, that makes a huge difference to our quality of life, and just to just in general, really. So celebrating differences as well, that's a big part, because everybody's different in a whole host of ways, and that's a really good thing, actually. I mean, society as a whole would be really boring if we were all the same, and it wouldn't just be boring, but we wouldn't kind of be as successful as a whole kind of species, as the human race, if we didn't have this huge variation and diversity and everything. So celebrating differences is really key. That's a really good one. And joining the autistic community as well, because I know that certainly Marion and I, when we actually first met, that was at a meetup that another autistic charity had put on, and so I went along, for the first time, going to meet a bunch of other autistic people other than my family, because turns out most of them are autistic as well anyway. But I didn't maybe realize quite how extensively that was the case at the time. And went along to this meeting, and it was like coming home. It was like finding my people. It was just absolutely brilliant. And I think that's the experience of so many of the autistic service users that we support as well, is once they find that autistic community and they become a part of the community, it's a really amazing, validating feeling, and that I just can't recommend it enough, kind of really trying to reach out there to the whole community. And then we've also got not using that deficit-based language. So, for so long, when we were talking about autism, when professionals were talking about autism, it was very much looking at it in terms of, what we were lacking. It was very much looking at us in terms of, in what way are we deficient? And we've come to realize that actually that's not an accurate way of looking at autistic people. We are different, but as well as sometimes, having some struggles that we can face, and having a lot of barriers, certainly, we also have a lot of strengths as well. There are some really positive aspects to being autistic too, and the language that we use really has a huge impact in how people think about us as well, and how we think about ourselves actually. So moving away from that deficit based language, changing the narrative around how we talk about autism is really key as well. It's a really big part of autistic acceptance. And then also accepting and protecting your boundaries. So as autistic people, we will often have different boundaries to, maybe other people out there. And I think that a lot of us often kind of apologize for that. We feel bad about it, we feel really guilty for the fact that maybe we can't manage to do certain things, that maybe we need to, a little bit more time to rest at certain times, that maybe we can't go out and about as much as other people, that there are certain things where we need to sort of say, no, actually, I can't do that. And we tend to apologize for that. We tend to feel guilty about it. But actually, it's okay. It's okay to have different boundaries to other people. There's really nothing wrong with that. And so accepting the fact that you do have these different needs, these very, very valid needs, and that they might be a bit different to other people, and then actually going ahead and putting into place those boundaries so that your needs are being met, is just really, really important, and it's a huge part of sort of autistic acceptance in general. I don't know if you want to take the second half of this slide, Marion, and have a look at some of the other.
Yeah, sure. Unmasking where it is safe to do so is another huge one as well. And I know that we've spoken about masking and unmasking quite a lot. We're going to be doing it again later on. And it's not necessarily safe to be unmasking absolutely everywhere for everybody, as we've discussed previously. But finding safe places, safe people around whom you can unmask the fact that you're autistic and be your own autistic authentic self can be really freeing, and it can be a part of autistic acceptance too, as long as you're doing it in a way that makes you feel safe. Immersing yourself in special interests is absolutely huge, and it can be such a fun thing to be able to do. I mean, last summer, I'm sure Flick will remember, I decided I was going to watch all of the Star Trek. And I'm nearly finished now. It's taken me quite a long time, but it's been a really, really fun thing to do, and I'm not bored of it at all. It is fantastic. I'm really tempted to just start right back at the beginning again, because special interests can be really fulfilling. They can absolutely enrich your life. And I think stimming is another thing that is such a huge, huge important thing. Flick, what stim toy have you got in your hands? Because I know you'll have one.
How did
Yeah,
you know?
I know. Because I've known you for years. Here's mine. Um, and stimming, for those who aren't aware, is short for self-stimulatory behaviors. And it's any kind of repetitive movement that can give you some sort of sensory feedback, and that can be what you traditionally think of as hand flapping for autistic people, and I am a big hand flapper. I love a good flap. For me, earlier today, jumping up and down as well, that's a really good fun stim for some of us. Playing with fidget toys can be part of stimming. For some people, it can be humming, yeah, rocking backwards and forwards, which I'm doing this evening as well. Spinning can be another one, but some of them are a bit more subtle. So some autistic people we know will twirl their hair. Rubbing your clavicle, that bone at the top of your chest, is for some autistic people, rubbing their clavicle is what they do, and you get some really nice fidget rings that you can use for stimming as well. You can also get some visual stims. So this morning, when it was snowing really hard, I just stood at my kitchen window and was just gleefully flapping while I was watching the snow falling, because for me that was a beautiful visual stim. And allowing yourself that ability to stim in places where you feel safe to do so is a really good other part of autistic acceptance. Exploring autistic culture, and embracing autistic communication styles, I feel, are quite linked up with each other. And Flick and I are wanting to do another webinar on autistic communication styles quite soon, I think. And the differences between autistic and non-autistic communication are vast. to be honest. We're all talking the same language, but we're not speaking the same language in so many different ways. So I think that's something that we would love to come back and talk about a little bit more. And autistic pride. We will be putting on the 5th annual Autistic Pride event in Aberdeen this year, which we are absolutely thrilled to be doing, and sometimes participating in Autistic Pride or celebrating or noticing or sort of just watching Autistic Pride events can sometimes be a big part of autistic acceptance as well, can't it, Flick?
Yes, it can. When I found the unmute button.
This will be your first in-person one.
Yes, I know. I'm really looking forward to it. Yeah.
Um, who is autistic acceptance for?
Everyone.
Nobody is exempt from autistic acceptance, are they?
We're all included. Absolutely everyone.
Yeah. So shall we have a look? We're going to start out having a look at autistic, why is it important for autistic people, then for family, for professionals, and then for wider society as well, because we do genuinely think that it is for everyone. So are you happy to have a start at this, Flick?
Absolutely.
Magic.
Okay, so thinking about why autistic acceptance matters to autistic people. So protects mental health, because actually a lot of us, unfortunately, do tend to have problems with our mental health. That's quite common, and a big part of that is the stigma that there is around autism, and a lot of the barriers that we face, but also a lot of it's to do with kind of internalized ableism as well, and not supporting our own autistic needs and things. So autistic acceptance can have a huge benefit to our mental health. It really can, and I say this from personal experience. I know that my mental health has definitely been much better since accepting, not just knowing that I was autistic, because that was one thing, and that was good, that was a really good first step, but actually accepting that I am autistic, and really trying to put into place those supports, and really learning about it and everything, and all those things that we looked at a couple of slides back, that has made a huge difference to my own mental health, and I've seen it as well in service users. It is really quite incredible. Yeah. and Marion as well is agreeing there, I think, from both personal experience and from having seen it with service users as well. And actually very much linked with that, in terms of both mental health and physical health, we end up increasing our lifespans when we accept our autistic needs and artistic selves and everything, because unfortunately, and it is really sad, autistic people do have a much shorter lifespan on average than a non-autistic person does, and that is a real tragedy, actually. Autism itself is absolutely not a tragedy, but the fact that we have these sort of shorter lifespans is. But the fact that, that if we really kind of push for autistic acceptance, that means that we end up with that increased lifespan again, and that's for a whole host of reasons. It's partly to do with the fact that our mental health is better, like in that first point there, that plays a huge part, and also kind of just supporting our needs in general means that we're better able to look after ourselves physically as well, and autistic acceptance in wider society too, because it means that we have decreased barriers for accessing things like medical care and things that we need. So that's a really big one. Improved self-image as well, because we often have this negative view of ourselves, and it's often because societally there's a lot of misinformation out there about autism, but a lot of autistic people kind of have quite a negative self view, certainly before they know they're autistic. That's incredibly common. I know that before I realized I was autistic, I kind of thought that I was a bit weird, that maybe I was even a bit lazy, which I think my husband would burst out laughing at. But honestly, because I had times when maybe my energy levels were, kind of down, or executive functioning, issues and things like that, thought of myself as being lazy as well. Sometimes I wondered if I was sort of self-centered because I just didn't seem to be kind of seeing things from other people's point of views in the same way as other people did. And now I realize, oh, I just have a different communication style. It's fine. So learning all these things about myself, learning that actually, no, I'm not some weirdo. I'm autistic. It's fine. I'm not lazy. I just need to really support my executive functioning needs. You know, I'm not rude. I have a different communication style. All of this has really improved my self-image, and that's very common for a lot of autistic people, you know. And it's really helped me to accept my own needs. So self-validation as well, because it really is very validating to realize that, yeah, I am a complete person and I have these needs and they are actually valid, and I as a human being have worth, you know, just intrinsically. And that's really important, and that's something that often comes along with that good autistic acceptance as well. Reasonable adjustments too, because quite often, you know, if you're sort of there without autistic acceptance, it might be the case that you're not actually going to ask for reasonable adjustments. You know, if you haven't accepted that you need reasonable adjustments in the first place, if you perhaps are feeling embarrassed about the fact that you're autistic, you know, any of these, self-advocating and, you know, asking for reasonable adjustments can be really, really difficult actually. So yeah, that's another big one, because having reasonable adjustments in place can make a huge difference to your quality of life as well. So it's all this really good positive cycle, you know. Once you got autistic acceptance, you can put into place the reasonable adjustments, which then also has a good impact on your quality of life, and you're better able to see yourself positively. And that's a really nice positive cycle to get into actually. You're better able to access peer support as well, because, you know, if you're not even realizing that your peers are other autistic people, or, you know, if you got sort of stigma around talking to autistic people or anything, then that's all going to be a barrier for you actually managing to access your own community, which is really sad, because like I said earlier, you know, going along to an autistic group for the first time was just a brilliant experience for me. It was amazing to find other people who communicated in the same way that I did, who had special interests like me that they just wanted to, you know, talk and talk and talk about. Finding people who had a lot of the same sensory kind of needs as I did as well, which was not my experience with the wider society. You know, all of these things that was amazing, and that was also really validating. So yeah, once you have that autistic acceptance, you're better able to find your people, you know, and find people who are going to make you feel good about yourself and understand your lived experience, because it's their lived experience as well. We're also then better able to access services too. You know, if we've got that better kind of self-advocacy, then that really helps. But also autistic acceptance, you know, in general kind of means that we're better able to access services, that people are going to be a bit better informed when we do access those services as well, that we're going to have that better knowledge about ourselves. We're going to know what services we even need to access in the first place, because if you just don't know much about autism, you know, you don't know what your autistic needs even are, then you're not even going to be aware of what services you're going to try to access, let alone be able to then access them as well. And you're just so much more likely to see yourself as someone who has innate worth. And we have intrinsic value as human beings, you know, and that doesn't, all of the rest doesn't matter. You have worth, you have innate worth as you are as a human being. And sometimes that's quite hard to hear, but once you do kind of get to that point in autistic acceptance where you can actually take that on board and accept it and realize it's true rather than just parroting the words, that can make a huge difference as well. And again, all of these feed into each other, because, you know, seeing yourself as someone who has innate worth is going to have a really good impact on your mental health. You know, if your mental health is better, it's going to have a, you know, you're going to have a better chance of accepting yourself. So they're all very, very interlinked. And yes, are you able to then go on and look at some other
I was just going to say one of the things about reasonable adjustments is we have been doing quite a lot of work with schools recently. And one things that we've heard from a few schools where they're really keen to offer reasonable adjustments to their students, the student doesn't want to look different to everybody else because they're not accepting who they are. And once that student becomes a lot more comfortable in their own skin, once they're more comfortable with their identity, it becomes so much easier to say, I'm going to wear these ear defenders. I'm going to sit in this as quieter part of the classroom. I use a scribe, and these things make their lives so much easier. And it's okay to need different things. It genuinely is, because everybody needs different things at different points, don't they? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is the thing. No two people are alike, whether they're autistic or not. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, why does autistic acceptance matter to family and friends? So, if you've accepted the fact that you are autistic in yourself, why does autistic acceptance matter to elsewhere? Well, if the people around you are pro autistic acceptance, then they're more likely to accept you as an autistic person for who you are, rather than trying to change you. And we've in the past had people asking questions about various different things. Should I be encouraging my child to stop flapping their hands? Should I be encouraging them to give me eye contact? All of this sort of thing. And a lot of that might be well intentioned, but it's actually really damaging to the autistic person, and it can be quite traumatizing at times. So by accepting the autistic person as they are, then that really, really is protecting them quite a lot. And it also means that they're less likely to pass on any unconscious bias or ableism. So a lot of the world, they're still thinking of autistic people as being less than, as being deficit, of not having the same ability to participate in society. And if you're really accepting of autism and people being autistic, then you're less likely to pass on these thoughts. And again, this is something that we've heard from some people, as they maybe heard from their parents that they were upset whenever they were sharing to other people that their child is autistic, and then that gives them that feeling that it's a bad thing. So then that makes them feel bad about who they are, even though there's absolutely no reason for them to be doing that. If you're accepting that your family member or is autistic, then it means that you're going to be better able to help advocate for reasonable adjustments. And again, this is something that we've come across a few times, where maybe somebody doesn't want to admit that their child or their partner is autistic, so then they don't want to ask for reasonable adjustments, because that would be just a step too far for them. They just weren't quite ready. And I think it's important to say that autistic acceptance is a journey. It's not either you have autistic acceptance or you don't. It really does take time for some people. So if somebody isn't quite there yet, that doesn't mean that they're not going to be. It's possible that they will. But the more you're accepting of the fact that your family and your friends are autistic, then the more likely you are to be able to help them to get those reasonable adjustments. And the more likely you're going to be to help that other autistic person to see that they themselves have intrinsic worth. Um, I've really lost count of the number of times Flick and I have supported somebody, and we've been able to share with them that they do have intrinsic worth, that they don't need to do X number of jobs in order to justify having lunch. They can just have lunch if they're hungry. And this is something that a lot of autistic people kind of really struggle with, that they have to prove that they're worthy to do things. And we really don't. We are worthy just as we are. And if we've got people around us, family and friends, who are accepting of who we are, it's going to be a lot easier for us to see ourselves as being worthy as we are. If you're accepting the fact that your family and friends are autistic, you're more likely to work with the fact that they're autistic. So being able to sort of say, okay, right, this light is a bit flickery. Okay, let's see if we can change and get a different light bulb. Oh, that noise is really quite loud from this electronic device that we don't need on. Let's go and turn that off. So it's just supporting them so that they're going to be in an environment that's really going to suit their needs. And it also, again, sort of links into understanding those autistic communication styles. So saying, oh, right, you said this and you meant that, rather than this other thing. Okay, got you. Right, that's fine. is working with their brand of autism rather than against it. You're more likely to provide opportunities for growth. If you're seeing an autistic child, for example, as maybe not likely to be able to learn how to read very well, then the opportunities for letting them learn are going to be quite limited. Whereas if you're seeing this autistic person as having potential that you just don't know about, then you're more likely to give them opportunities to learn and grow. So accepting that they've got more um, potential than perhaps you've realized is going to give them more opportunities, and you're going to be able to see them shine in ways that you probably didn't expect them to be able to. As we've said, we've kind of covered that autistic acceptance is more likely to protect the autistic person from trauma. So it'll mean that you're less likely to accidentally or subconsciously provide some trauma, but you're also going to help protect them from trauma from others as well. And I do remember a particular incident when I told someone that a family member of mine was autistic, and their reaction was, "Oh no!" They actually shouted it and stared at the person. And our response was, "We actually like the fact that they're autistic. It's good. There's loads of benefits. That it really enriches all of our lives." So then that autistic person was able to see us being quite happy about it. You maybe hear them being quite happy in the background just now too. Also, autism is largely genetic, right? Roughly 80% of autistic people have at least one autistic parent, if not both. So if you're accepting of the fact that you have autistic family members, then it might make you more open to noticing that you might be autistic yourself. And I think that quite a lot of us who are autistic adults didn't realize that we were autistic until we had autistic children. Yeah. And the more likely you are to accept the fact that your children are autistic, more likely you are to recognize that that might be you, or it might be your partner or your ex-partner. Yeah. Is that fair to say, Flick?
Yes, definitely. And how many one-to-ones have we had, with parents where at some point we've had to kind of say, you do know it's genetic, right? And then you get that moment of, oh,
It's like a light bulb going off.
oh.
So beautiful, isn't it?
I mean, we've been there.
Yeah, absolutely. We know we've had those light bulb moments for ourselves. We get it. Yeah. I'm going to mute so you can hear less background noise as well.
Okay, so why does autistic acceptance matter to professionals as well? We've looked at autistic people, we've looked at, kind of family and friends around the autistic person. So now we're going to have a little think about professionals. And there is quite a lot of overlap here as well with the previous slide. So yeah, they're more likely to accept their autistic person for who they are, much like with family and friends. And that can be really important for professionals when they're working with an autistic client or service user for a whole number of reasons. They need to be accepting of the individual that they're working with, so that they're not going to be kind of doing any of these other things that are going to have knock-on negative impact. Much like with family and friends, they're less likely to pass on any unconscious bias or ableism as well. And we've seen that with professionals, and again, often they are very, very well-meaning, but quite often they may be just sort of lacking in that good quality, like up-to-date information, and so they have this kind of ableist view without realizing it, and if they are then working with an autistic person and they're acting like that autistic person is not capable, maybe isn't competent, is in some way kind of lacking, then that's going to have a big impact on the autistic individual that they're working with, and they're more likely to implement effective reasonable adjustments, because lots of professionals do recognize these days that they need reasonable adjustments, that autistic people are entitled, that we have that legal protection as well under the Equality Act. So a lot of professionals are moving towards being very willing to put into place reasonable adjustments. The problem often is that they don't actually know what's going to help. They don't know what are going to be effective reasonable adjustments. So they might have worked with one or two autistic people in the past. They figured out, okay, well, this helped them, or they've read in a book, autistic people need X. Let's just implement that in every situation for every autistic person. And thing is, we're actually not all the same. Strangely enough, us autistic bunch are all individuals just as much as non-autistic people are all individuals, or not all, they don't all have exactly the same needs. So the reasonable adjustments that we might actually require will vary quite a lot from person to person. And it's really key kind of getting professionals who are working with autistic people to understand that, to really have a think about what reasonable adjustments will be effective for the individual that they're working with, rather than trying to find kind of blanket things that they think are going to help everyone, because quite often we might have very different needs, and sometimes we might have contradictory needs as well, so yeah, kind of learning to work with the individual is really, really key. They're more likely to help the autistic person to see themselves as having innate worth as well. Again, if you've got somebody, say a teacher, for instance, you think about how much time they're spending with the autistic kids in their class, what a big impact they're going to be having on the way that those autistic kids are viewing themselves. You think about going to university when you've just moved away for the first time. If you've got a tutor who is telling you that you do have innate worth, at a time when you're maybe feeling vulnerable being away from home or something, then that's going to make a huge difference compared to if actually, they're kind of only basing their opinion on your worth on how much coursework you're completing or something like that. So all the professionals, whether they're doctors, whether they're kind of therapists, whether they're teachers, whoever they might be, it's really important for them to be able to help the autistic individuals they're working with to see that they have that innate worth. They're more likely to work with the fact that their client is autistic rather than against it. I've certainly come across professionals who have said things like, okay, but putting your autism aside for a minute, what would you do? And I'm just thinking, my brain is literally structured differently to other people. That's what makes me autistic. So I can't put that aside. All my thoughts, all the things I say, all my actions, are all filtered through an autistic brain. Did you need
Not
to
a
add something there, Marion?
It's not a handbag. It's not a backpack that you can just leave. It's
Just pop
you
down.
don't accessorize with autism.
No, it's not something that we can just, okay, well, for a minute, I'll just place it over in the cupboard and we can kind of be without it. No, I am autistic. I have always been autistic. I will always be autistic. And it informs absolutely every single action that I take, every thought I have. There is no separating me out from the autism, So it's really important that professionals working with autistic people understand that, and instead of trying to fight the fact that their client is autistic, they actually work with the fact that they're autistic instead. That makes it a huge difference. They're also more likely to provide opportunities for growth, in a whole range of different ways, but actually realizing that the autistic people they're supporting are capable of growth is a huge thing, because not all professionals do realize that, unfortunately, and not all autism training that's out there really highlights that. Something that we always make sure we really highlight when we do training is that, autistic people can, of course, we can grow, we can learn, we can develop, much like anybody else. So providing those opportunities is really good. They're also, again, much like with the family and friends, going to be more likely to protect the autistic person they're supporting from trauma as well. And that might be that they are protecting the autistic individual from other outside sources. It might be, for instance, in a classroom, it might be making sure that all the children are getting on board with autistic acceptance, so that autistic pupils are not going to be getting bullied, for instance, which can cause a lot of trauma. But in adult services as well, it's really important, and it's important that the professional themselves are not accidentally inflicting trauma on us as well, through ignorance, or through kind of having that deficit based sort of view of autism. And they're more likely to treat autistic colleagues as equals and with respect as well, because you've got professionals out there who are specifically working with autistic clients and service users and everything, but sometimes they can forget that the people they're working with as well, the other professionals in their field, some of them are going to be autistic, because actually, don't tell anyone, but we've infiltrated pretty much every single area of society. We are everywhere. So, there's a high chance they have autistic colleagues. And if they have that really good acceptance already, then they're more likely to be a good colleague and a good ally to their colleagues, and to really value the work that they're producing as well. And that's really important to remember as well, isn't it, Marion?
Yeah, I think people still have this idea that we have autistic people in one corner of society. And then in the rest of the society, we have family members, we have professionals, and all the rest of it. And parents are that out in society as well. But I mean, you and I are autistic adults, autistic parents, and autism professionals. And we've worked with autistic adults who work in all sorts of sectors, who volunteer in all sorts of sectors, who contribute to society across every sector as well. And we're missing out autistic people everywhere if we're just thinking about them as being in like one wee corner, all hiding in our houses. And for some autistic people, maybe they are, but for a lot of us, we're out there, and we're colleagues, friends, family members. Yeah, we're not just separate, are we?
No, absolutely. And I think that's something that we really want more people to think about, in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah. Right. So why does it matter to wider society, though? Um, I, I I think autistic acceptance. So a lot of the time, whenever people think about autism acceptance, they think about families and families accepting people being autistic. But it is really so much more than that. The more that we have wider society accepting the fact that autistic people exist, and that we have a right to exist in society, we're going to see reduced stigma and discrimination. And at the moment, as autistic people, we still receive quite a significant amount of stigma and discrimination. Um, and sometimes it can be really huge events whenever these things happen. Sometimes they can be sort of small microaggressions, but barely a day goes by where we don't have something like that. And that can be really hard going, that can be difficult. And the more the wider society is accepting of the fact that we're here, the less stigma and discrimination we're going to experience. Increased understanding and acceptance. And I think there is a lot of work going on, particularly in Scotland, to be promoting autistic understanding and acceptance as well. But it is going to take a bit of time. It's not going to sort of happen overnight. These things do take a while, and we can certainly have a discussion about how we move these things forward too. More adjustable environments to suit sensory needs, which really does benefit everyone. And I think for some people, it's just tiny adjustments to make an environment more suitable. It's just making sure that the tap isn't dripping, right? It's changing a light bulb whenever it needs to be changed. It's making sure that whenever there's a strong smell coming off the sea, that you're just closing the window. They're not big things. They don't cost money an awful lot of the time. But what we've generally found is that whenever you adjust an environment to suit the autistic individuals in that environment, it really benefits everybody. And as a case in point, some of the schools that we've been working with have now either stopped using the bell altogether, or they've stopped using it when the kids are inside, and they're just using it when the kids are outside to let them know to come in. And the difference on the entire class, not just the autistic students, is quite enormous. And it's a really, really common thing that once we make the environment easier to be in for autistic people, it's easier to be in for the most. And sometimes we do have conflicting needs, and that's why we need things to be really adjustable, isn't it? If we have wider autistic acceptance in society, we're hoping that that would mean better and faster access to assessment and diagnostic pathways and an increase to pre and post diagnostic support. Flick and I feel incredibly privileged that we're able to provide some pre and post diagnostic support to some people, which is great, especially to those in our local community. But we understand that for some people, they need more complicated post-diagnostic support than we're able to provide. And we'd really love to see everybody being able to get the access to support that they need whenever they need it, regardless of whether they've got an official identification that they're autistic, an official diagnosis that they're autistic or not. Needs should be based on, support should be based on needs rather than on your diagnosis. And we'd really love to see reasonable adjustments as standard. I'd love it if anytime anybody got a new job, they were like, right, what are the things that we can do to make this job accessible for you? Regardless of whether they're autistic or ADHD, dyslexic, neurotypical, everybody's got different things that's going to make their job that little bit easier. So let's see about reasonable adjustments just as standard for everybody. And I think we'd see more people flourishing, wouldn't we, Flick?
Absolutely. I think that a lot of, I think if the pandemic has shown anything as well, it's that people can find all sorts of new and creative ways of working and kind of contributing and communicating. And when we're all allowed to do that in our own way and our own style, it's a good thing, actually. I think that was, one of the very few good things to come out of the global pandemic,
Absolutely, yeah. Well, we've got more about why autistic acceptance matters to wider society because we really blooming care about this one, don't we? Are you?
Absolutely. Yes,
Yeah,
yes, I can.
this is
Yeah, it's
so
so
important.
important. Yeah, it really is. It's such a big thing to make sure that everybody, everyone is educated and accepting of, not just autism as a concept, but the all autistic people. So yeah, having that kind of wider societal acceptance would mean that autistic people are less likely to experience trauma, and it is very sad that we do tend to have a trauma background. I know that a huge number of the service users, I would say most service users that I have supported, and I think it would be the same for Marion as well.
Not
Yeah.
just service users, though, is it?
Well, no, oh no. I mean, it's not just the service users that I've supported who have that trauma background. I mean, it's most autistic people that I've spoken to, really. It's really quite a depressing thing, the fact that, yeah, so many autistic people have experienced trauma, that they've been traumatized, and that they're kind of having to cope with those after effects. But if we make sure that we get, the whole message of autistic acceptance out there, if we're making sure that wider society are just understanding autism better, that they've got that proper good quality up-to-date information, that yeah, it's much likely to be the case that almost all autistic people end up with a trauma background. Hopefully we can get to the point where actually it's quite rare for us to have a trauma background, instead of it kind of being a given. When you find an autistic individual, that would be really, really good. And autistic people would also be much more likely to reach our potential as well, because we have an awful lot to give. And it's not necessarily just in terms of employment, although yes, also in terms of employment, because a lot of autistic people are underemployed, or unemployed, and disproportionately so. And actually we often make brilliant employees for a whole host of reasons. I mean, we often have brilliant attention to detail. We have that ability to really hyper focus on things when we're really interested in them. We can sort of recognize patterns an awful lot of the time as well. We tend to be quite loyal, you know, and honest too. We are often very, very creative. You know, there's so many benefits to having autistic employees, but we're just not being employed an awful lot of the time. So we're not getting a chance to really show off all of those strengths, because we're either not getting the jobs or we're not getting those reasonable adjustments put into place. So we're not really able to flourish. And so yeah, that would make a huge difference. And actually it really has been shown that companies who do make an effort to employ, you know, a really diverse workforce, they do better, they benefit. They do much better than companies who don't, you know, who don't make those efforts. So it really is beneficial. And in terms of the potential outside of work as well, we have so much to offer, you know, as friends, as volunteers, as just doing our own little thing, you know. As family members, we're so valuable, but quite often we're just not given that chance to reach our potential, but because of all the stigma, you know, because of a lot of the stereotypes. So yeah, that would be an absolutely huge one. Also, autistic people would be more able to access facilities, because at the moment we do come across an awful lot of barriers in a huge number of areas. You know, I know that, for instance, maybe just getting along to even a GP appointment for some autistic people is really difficult for a whole host of reasons. That means it's just not accessible for them. But also, you know, what about if I want to go swimming, for instance? You know, is that going to be accessible to me? There might be another whole list of reasons why I'm going to struggle to access that. So yeah, autistic acceptance throughout wider society, you know, throughout everybody, will mean that all these sorts of things become much more accessible for autistic people. And also, we have that knock-on effect as well, that we will end up with reduced stigma for other minority groups as well, when we recognize that intersectionality, you know, those areas where we might be part of two different minority groups, you know. So where you might have, for instance, you know, in my case, I'm an autistic woman, but you've also got, you know, autistic Black people, for instance, or autistic people who are also part of the LGBT plus community, although I also fit into that umbrella too, as so many of us do. So, you know, like thinking about the fact that with every characteristic you're adding, things get that little bit more difficult to kind of access an awful lot of the time. But when we start thinking about that and we really discuss it and we start recognizing it, then actually it becomes better for everyone. And I think that a lot of autistic people, you know, make really good allies to other minority groups, often because we understand, and I think that's the case an awful lot as well, is that we all kind of end up quite good allies to each other, because we understand having stigma, you know, we understand having kind of barriers to accessing things. And so when we're all kind of working together as well, you know, we all come together, then that's just positive for everybody involved, and I think that's a really good thing. There's also and you know, this is one that sometimes, you know, we sort of think we shouldn't have to say this, because yeah, the fact that our needs, we have needs, should be enough, but actually it benefits wider society, because there's reduced pressure on the NHS when autistic people are getting access to a diagnostic pathway early, and then we're getting our needs really well supported. We're much less likely to constantly be going to the doctor for poor mental health. You know, we're much less likely to be constantly needing that support. We've got going to have less pressure on local councils as well, and on social work and on schools, because again, if we're actually being well supported, we're not going to be needing to access a lot of these services, and take up time, you know, with problems that we're having, to the same extent. So it actually does benefit everybody around us, and not just us as autistic people. It really does have a positive impact that kind of ripples out to everybody else, if you like. So it's important for wider society as well.
And I think so many of the issues that we have to go back to and get these support from these places from are so avoidable. You know, if the environment was suiting our needs, then so much would be avoidable. If we were given work in a way that works for our processing styles, then that would be avoidable. If people are understanding our communication styles, then we wouldn't have to go back to the GP 3 times for the same issue sometimes. So, you know, it's all things that are completely avoidable, and it just takes a little bit of work and a little bit of understanding, and that would be it, wouldn't it? Yeah. Just a few slides to go, and then we'll be able to stop. But how do we start on that journey to autistic acceptance? Because this is a really, really big thing. How do we help people to begin this journey? I think first of all, we really need to examine our unconscious bias. So what do we really think when we hear the word autistic? Do you think of a small white boy rocking backwards and forward talking about trains? Because that's been the traditional image that a lot of people have whenever they hear the word autistic. Are you thinking about a middle-aged woman? Are you thinking about a South Asian woman? Are you thinking about transgender people? Um, are you thinking about your next door neighbour? Are you thinking about the person in your office who uses a wheelchair? Are you thinking about anybody who doesn't fit into that traditional model? Because autistic people can look like anything. They can be in any sector of society. You know, you could be thinking of the word autistic, and some people might think librarian, but are you also thinking RAF pilot? Because that could be too. So you really need to have a think, right? Whenever we're thinking about the word autistic, have we got this really narrow mind view, this narrow mindset, or are we opening it out to include anybody that could look like anything, any size, shape, color, any cultural background, any religion? Because that's who we should be thinking of. We should be thinking about that there's the fact that there's autistic people everywhere. And I think we also have to accept that some of what we think we know about autism may be out of date. And I remember back when I was doing my initial teacher training 17 years ago, I was told that I think it was something like roughly 1 in 10 autistic people are girls. And we know that that's not the case anymore. We know that even the out of date information that we have now that's saying about 1 in 4 people who are diagnosed autistic are female, we know that's still out of date too. That's not been updated properly. So it's worth bearing in mind that if you learned about autism, especially a wee while ago, or if you're learning from sources that haven't been keeping themselves up to date, then you might not have the most accurate information. So just check where's the information coming from, who's putting it out there. Accessing up-to-date autistic-led information. I think one of the things that I really found was that I spent about 12 years learning about autism from non-autistic people. And it wasn't until I started learning about autism from autistic people that I actually really started getting a lot more of the nuance into what it's like to be autistic. And I started realizing that, hang on, this relates to me as well. You know, I'm part of the autistic crew. And that made a huge, 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 huge difference because so much of our autistic lived experience hasn't been studied. Um, we don't have many bits of research into what it's like to be autistic and menopausal. We don't have a lot of research into what it's like to be autistic and pregnant, or what it's like to be autistic and moving into a care home because you're in your 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. There's loads of that's missing. So lots of the things that autistic people want researched hasn't actually been researched yet. So make sure that you are speaking to people who are autistic themselves and learn about some anecdotal evidence, and listen to what they've got to say. Yeah. And always be asking as well, if you're not autistic yourself and you're working with autistic people or you're raising somebody who's autistic, have I created equitable opportunities? How have I made this accessible for everybody in my classroom, for everybody in my workplace, for everybody in my home? has everybody got an equitable opportunity? So when we talk about equal opportunities, we mean that everybody has the same opportunities. But if we're talking about equitable, is it accessible for the autistic person? Is it in a way that they're going to understand it? And listen to and learn from autistic people from other cultures, religions, ethnic backgrounds, genders, etc. Any other kind of intersectionality. And we thoroughly recommend that you go out and check as many different autistic people on social media, on blogs, on YouTube that you possibly can, because we all have different experiences that really influence our life. They influence how we present as autistic people. And the more that we're listening to people from other areas, the more we're going to be able to recognize other autistic people in our society and support them. I'm trying to learn to understand about autistic culture and communication styles. As I said, Flick and I are hoping to come back and do another webinar on autistic communication quite soon. I think we're going to have to just step that up and get it scheduled, mate. I think that's quite important for us to be doing. But autistic communication and non-autistic communication really are significantly different. And for a very, very, very long time, people talked about autism as a communication deficit, as a social deficit. And research, up-to-date research has shown that autistic people don't have communication deficits. We're actually very good at communicating with each other. The problem comes whenever we sometimes have two neurotypes who are not working to understand each other, bumping heads. So we need to move away from that. We need to start recognizing that autistic people just naturally have this different communication style. And whenever we work with that, that's a huge journey towards autism acceptance. That's stopping trying to change the autistic person to start communicating in a different way and supporting their own natural communication style, isn't it, Flick?
Yeah, that's a huge one, isn't it?
Absolutely massive, yeah. What else can we do?
Okay, so to start the journey as well, we should be challenging the assumptions about language as well. So, thinking about how you're talking about autism in general, whether you're using that kind of deficit-based language, whether you're talking about, sort of having a communication deficit rather than a different communication style. We're also sort of having a little think about sort of talking about person first language. Are we using identity first language? Now we would always say that autistic people should be able to refer to themselves as they like. We are not the language police, okay? We are not here to tell people how to talk about themselves. We would never ever do that. But what we can say is that sort of traditionally, it was taught for quite a long time that what you should say is you should refer to a person with autism. And that's known as person first language. And that was because it was thought that, you need to remember that they're more than just their autism. They're a person as well. And I can understand the thinking behind that. But I also kind of think, if you can't remember that the person that you're dealing with is a human being, is a person, then that says more about you than about them, actually. that's not good. And what we have found is that all the kind of studies that have been done where we've actually asked autistic people is that the majority, not all of us, but the majority of us do actually prefer what's known as identity first language, which is what Marion and I have been using, throughout this whole webinar here. So that's talking about autistic people rather than people with autism. And we do that because, as I said earlier, I have an autistic brain. That's what makes me autistic. And that means that absolutely everything that I do, say, think, feel is filtered through that autistic brain. It's not something that can be removed from me. It isn't, like Marion said, a bag that I can put down over there. I can pick up and carry, or I can pop down again when I feel like it. I am autistic, and I always have been, and I always will be. So I prefer to refer to myself as an autistic person rather than a person with autism, in the same way that I refer to myself as a mother rather than a person with motherhood. It's a part of my identity, and that's okay, actually. That's not a bad thing. I don't need to think of myself as more than just the autism, because there's nothing wrong with me being autistic. So yeah, that there's nothing negative there to kind of get away from. So yeah, it's really thinking about that language. I did I glanced at the chat earlier, and I saw somebody talking about sort of moving away from functioning labels as well. So it's thinking about things like that, for a long time when we were talking about autistic people, a lot of professionals would refer to somebody as being high functioning or low functioning. And that's something that the autistic community has really kind of moved away from. It's not helpful. It's really not a helpful way to view autism at all. What you tend to find is that the autistic people who are thought of as high functioning are then denied support, because they don't need it, they're high functioning. And then those autistic people who are thought of as being low functioning are denied opportunities. And not only that, not only is it negative in that way, but it's not even really accurate either, because what does it mean to be high functioning or low functioning? So what if you have somebody, an autistic individual who has a degree, maybe even a postgrad? Oh well, they're definitely going to be high functioning, right? Well, what if they're non-speaking, actually? What if they struggle really to tell the time? What if their executive functioning skills mean that they're not really able to actually cook for themselves, and they need somebody else to prepare their food? Well, okay, so are they still high functioning, or are they low functioning? Or, does it kind of swing during the day depending on whether they're studying or whether they're trying to get food? Or, it's just not it's just not something that makes an awful lot of sense. And also, because what we tend to think about now is more about support needs. What are our support needs? And that's something that's very, very fluid. It can be very fluid throughout your lifetime. Things like hormonal changes can have a huge impact. But more than that, it can be fluid throughout the day. My support needs in the morning when I first get up might be completely different from my support needs at kind of getting on to lunchtime, might be again completely different to in the evening. Certainly my support needs this evening, after having done this webinar, are likely to be a little bit higher than they were when I got up first thing this morning after I'd had quite a good night's sleep. So things like sleep and our diet and how well supported we are, all of these things have a huge impact on what our support needs are. So yeah, sort of thinking about autism in terms of high or low functioning, it's just not helpful at all, and it just doesn't really make that much sense. And it's for in a very similar way that sort of thinking about autism as being mild or severe is also language that we're moving away from now. Thinking of autism as being that linear line, that the spectrum as being that kind of linear line. That's just not something that most autistic people would sort of view autism as being anymore. Generally speaking, now we would kind of think about the spectrum as maybe being more to do with, okay, so what are my communication needs for the day? What are my sensory needs for the day? What are my executive functioning skills looking like today? There's it's more like a wheel rather than a linear line. So thinking about that, really challenging, okay, so what language am I using to talk about autism and to talk about autistic people? Going out there and reading, right, okay, so what is up to date now? And sometimes it's the case that, I've had service users, I've had other professionals say to me in one-to-ones, in meetings, in webinars and the like, oh, actually, I think we're moving away from that term now. People are starting to, and I say, oh, thank you so much for letting me know, and I'll go and have a little look into that then. Like, all right, okay, the language is changing, because it does change as we get that better knowledge. We do change how we talk about it, and that's okay. And it's okay to get things wrong as well, because we do the best that we can with the information that we have, as long as when you realize that actually some information you had is out of date, you do your best to update yourself and to change the way that you're talking. And that's as much as we can ask from anybody. Okay, so moving on, because I know I've spent a lot of time on that point there, although it is an important one. We can also start that journey to autistic acceptance by developing an understanding of autistic crisis points as well. So when we talk about crisis points, we're talking about autistic meltdowns, shutdowns, elopement. So when we're getting to that point, when we're getting so overwhelmed, so overloaded, that we're having those neurological events that take place in the brain. And at the moment, there's still a lot of stigma around, having a meltdown. People might talk about, oh yeah, you had a tantrum, because they don't realize that there is a huge difference between a tantrum and an autistic meltdown. So yeah, really kind of educating yourself on what autistic crisis points actually are, why they happen, what can be put into place to help, what can be put into place to support an individual if they're going through one of those. That's really important as well. Did you have something to add there, Marion?
Say we have loads of information about that and the sensory
Yeah,
needs on our website. So I'm sure Julie will be more than happy to put in a couple of links to the website, so then people can read those two parts there and get the resources that we've got for supporting those two. Yeah.
absolutely. And we've got the language section on there as well, so yeah, just give it all a good read. It's all good stuff. Yes, also recognizing autistic expressions of empathy, because for a long time there was this kind of myth out there that autistic people don't experience empathy. But yeah, I really don't think that you and I could actually do our jobs if we weren't empathetic.
I literally did mine for 2 years for free.
Yeah,
So I think that was fairly empathetic. But
yeah,
sometimes when we express that empathy is quite different, isn't it? Yeah.
exactly. This is the thing. It's not that we don't feel empathy. It's not that autistic people are not capable of experiencing empathy. If anything, actually some of us experience empathy more deeply than your typical non-autistic person. What's the difference is how we express that empathy. So for instance, if we see somebody and they're going through a really tough time and they're suffering, we're much less likely to kind of make sympathetic noises and give them a pat on the back and go, oh, they're there, it's okay. We're maybe a bit more likely to go, right, you've got a problem. What's the solution? I'm going to fight. I'm on it. I'm going to solve this problem for you. And that is an expression of empathy in itself, because we are seeing somebody suffering. We want to do something to fix it because we understand that feeling, and because often we're feeling it as well if they are. We also empathize with people by sharing personal stories. All of these things that autistic people do, we really do show empathy. We just do it in a different way because we have that different communication style. So we're communicating our empathy in a different way, much like we communicate everything in a different way. Doesn't mean we're not experiencing it. But also accepting and supporting sensory needs, which again, we've got loads of great resources up on the hub there, the information hub, about sensory stuff and autism. But yeah, kind of really understanding and accepting that sensory needs are real as well, that autistic people do have different sensory experiences, rather than gaslighting us and telling us that no no, that's not too hot, no, don't be silly, it's not too spicy, no, that tag is not scratchy, it's fine. Actually accepting that we do genuinely experience sensory input differently. That is a real thing, and we have different sensory needs. And learning about neurodiversity and neurodivergence. So neurodiversity is the idea that, much like with biodiversity, that there are is that there's lots of different kinds of life. Neurodiversity means that there's lots of different kinds of brains out there, and neurodivergence is when you've got one of those brains that diverges, that's different to your kind of standard brain. So neurodivergence covers autistic people, but also ADHD and dyslexia and dyspraxia as well. And we're also sort of thinking about other things as well, like schizophrenia too. There's a whole kind of area. Basically, if you have a brain that's different, then you're neurodivergent. And embracing the positive aspects of being autistic as well. And there are some brilliant positive aspects to being autistic. So autistic joy is amazing, and I feel quite sad for non-autistic people that they don't experience that intense, ecstatic feeling that we can get. Sensory bliss as well. Marion sort of talking about watching the snow earlier, and I was thinking, oh, I bet there was a bit of sensory bliss going on there. That's amazing. That's really brilliant. Our sense of humor too, because actually a lot of autistic people can have quite a wicked sense of humor. I know that a lot of the autistic people that I know do, and just so many other things. The fact that we get to immerse ourselves in our special interests, all the different positive aspects of being autistic. Certainly I wouldn't choose not to be autistic myself. So yeah, embracing the fact that it isn't just this doom and gloom, this tragedy is a huge part of autistic acceptance.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fully open to the fact that being autistic can sometimes make my life harder, absolutely. But it also enriches my life in innumerable ways as well. And I think this is something you and I were talking about earlier on this week, isn't it? Is what we would lose if we weren't autistic.
Yeah.
Just wouldn't make it worth it to us. Um, for the beautiful aspects of it. So when we're supported and when we're accepting of ourselves, yeah, we can live a really beautiful life, can't we?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
And I think, I mean, one of the big things we really want people to see is that, autism acceptance, autistic acceptance really is a journey, and it's definitely not linear. It's not like you start off not accepting autism and autistic people, and then in the end you do. It's not a destination at the end. And sometimes we do kind of take backward steps and side steps, and that is completely natural. And this is something I've spoken about before, is that, as somebody who has situational mutism, which is related to the fact that I'm autistic, a lot of the time I'm absolutely fine with it. And to be honest, I've had a very busy week. I expect to be experiencing situational mutism this evening, and I'm totally cool with the fact that I have. But there have been times when I've been really annoyed about it, and that's actually okay. It's just a natural part of the journey too. But the important thing is that we keep on going, and we keep on asking questions, and we do keep on challenging our assumptions, and we do keep on asking, how can I do better? How can I accept myself more? How can I work with the fact that I'm autistic more? What are my needs that I have that I'm not meeting right now? And then that's keeping us going on that journey to autistic acceptance. And, don't worry if you stumble a bit along the way, because we all do. This is not something that any of us manages to get through unscathed, really, is it? We've got just the last couple of things before we go out for a chat. We've got some useful links. So we do have our website and the Different Minds website from the Scottish Government as well, which is a fantastic campaign if you haven't already engaged with it, that the Scottish Government has been doing, which is completely autistic led, and Flick and I have been working really hard with them. And just, was it the end of last week, the beginning of this week, Chris Bonillo from Autistic Not Weird put out the results of a new survey that he carried out this year. And I think it definitely has a lot of really interesting insights into what the autistic community wants and how we view ourselves. So it's a definitely one worth a watch. And he had, I think, over 11,000 people who participated in the survey. So really interesting. Our last key takeaways, not huge ones. I mean, sometimes we have key takeaways at the end of our webinars and they're enormous. This one's really quite short. Autistic acceptance is for everyone. There is nobody who is exempt from autistic acceptance. There's nobody for whom autistic acceptance is not important. It absolutely is for everybody. And acceptance improves quality of life. And it's just one of those things where it's not just the autistic person whose quality of life improves, it's their family, it's their friends, it's their colleagues, it's their teachers, it's their classmates, it's their line managers. Everybody's quality of life improves whenever we're working with the fact that people are autistic and we're accepting it. And autistic acceptance really is a journey. So yeah, there will be steps forward. There's going to be some steps backwards, side steps. That's okay. Genuinely is. It's just important that we keep on going. So thank you so much for the people who are watching the recording. Thank you so much for listening. Can I ask Julie to stop the recording now before